biggest common denominator in this election is people want a good life and ability to provide for their family.
Well,
and whether we agree or not with Donald Trump's plans,
Black people
they thought that he was reflective.
One of the poorest demographics in this country, but they voted for Kamala Harris.
But there was a split, and more of them voted for Donald Trump than had historically. I think that there's such a desire. If you really think the vast majority of this country voted because of racism and misogyny, you're missing it. Most of my family, a lot of my family doesn't have college degrees.
But the stats are the stats.
But that's not, it doesn't say I'm white, I voted for Donald Trump because of racism. That's not, let me just talk. What stats are you talking?
Let me just dissect.
Yes, you can. There's a lot.
In today's headline-making episode, we're diving into the latest buzz from The View. Alyssa Farah Griffin is pushing back against Sunny Hostin's long-held stance that Donald Trump's political rise is primarily rooted in racism. Their exchange underscores deeper ideological divides, not just on the panel, but across the media landscape and within the never-Trump conservative camp. It's a clear signal that the political climate is evolving, with practical thinking starting to take priority over rigid ideology. Watch this.
It was the right thing to do, and I've heard a lot of folks on the left coming after Joe and Mika saying, don't normalize him. Well, 75 million plus American voters normalized Donald Trump by making him President-elect Donald Trump. In this notion that if sort of the resistance who opposes him stayed in their safe bubbles, sat on their hands and just complained about him for 4 years, that would have a bigger impact than sitting down. I talked to Mika, actually. They met with him for over 90 minutes. They raised very valid concerns. They both see themselves as opinion journalists who want to actually be able to engage the person that they talk about every day, actually be able to raise issues with them when they're concerned. And in the same way that I thought it was right for Joe Biden to meet with him, and that I think it's right for presidents to meet with foreign adversaries to try to find diplomatic relations and ways to bring people together and solve problems. This is absolutely the right thing. I would sit down with Donald Trump. I would interview Donald Trump. And I'll go a step further. I hope good people work for him. We need to stop demonizing people because they supported a man who just became president of the United States. We should hope good people are around him and smart journalists are challenging.
Look, the bottom line is that America needs a free press that is willing to speak truth to power right now, more than ever. And I think that we have to be very clear-eyed when we think about the president-elect and cover the president-elect. And I don't think you need to sit down for 90 minutes at Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ring to be able to speak truth and to be able to cover a story. So maybe they're not journalists in the true sense. Maybe they're saying that they're opinion journalists. But we have to remember that Trump is the guy who ushered in the era of fake news. He is the guy who ushered in alternative facts. He is the guy who attacked 3 black female journalists. He's the guy that revoked Jim Acosta's press credentials for asking him a question. And so I think that this president-elect, I hate to say it, would like nothing more than to have only Fox News cover him, would like nothing more than a state-sponsored media. And I don't think he can be trusted in the way that other presidents can be trusted. This is an aberration.
Griffin's recent remarks on The View show just how much her perspective has evolved. Once a vocal critic of Donald Trump, she's now adopting a more nuanced position, one that reflects how some conservative voices are speaking out in traditionally liberal forums. Griffin defended MSNBC's Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski for recently meeting with Trump, arguing that engaging with him is more productive than excluding him. She emphasized the importance of recognizing Trump's supporters rather than writing them off, since they represent millions of Americans. When Sunny Hostin challenged her, Griffin held her ground, advocating for respectful dialogue instead of name-calling and division. Her message was clear: we must stop talking over each other and start working together to solve real issues. Sunny Hostin, however, remains firm in her view. She maintains that Trump's rise is rooted in racism and sexism, pointing to voting, data that shows sharp divides along racial and educational lines. In her eyes, these dynamics still heavily influence voter behavior, and can't be dismissed. Griffin disagrees, believing that the 2016 and 2020 elections were largely driven by economic frustration and a desire for a better future. She also cited Trump's increasing support among Latino voters as evidence that his appeal goes beyond hate. It's more complex than people think. This exchange brings up a critical question. What is really driving voters in America today? As divisions deepen, answering that question has never been more important. Let's take a closer look.
As a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, but it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist, even if your lived experience doesn't tell you that it exists. And the facts support that. I think we have a graph. If you look at there's a clear racial divide in who voted for Trump as opposed to who voted for Kamala Harris. It's very clear. I think it's an uncomfortable, inconvenient truth about this country.
His point is they didn't vote for him because of racism and misogyny. They voted for him because they felt like, I think the biggest common denominator in this election is people want a good life and ability to provide for their family.
Well,
And whether we agree or not with Donald Trump's plans,
Black people
they thought that he was
one of the
reflective.
poorest demographics in this country, but they voted for Kamala Harris.
But there was a split, and more of them voted for Donald Trump than had historically. I think that there's such a desire. If you really think the vast majority of this country voted because of racism and misogyny, you're missing it. Most of my family, a lot of my family doesn't have college degrees.
The stats are the stats.
But that's not, it doesn't say, I'm white, I voted for Donald Trump because of racism. That's not, let me just that. What stat are you talking about?
Let me just dissect
Let me just, you can. There's a lot
Hold on. Calm down. Everybody just take a breath. Take a breath.
The Never Trumpers, once viewed as principled voices standing against Donald Trump, are now under fire for losing touch and influence. Despite their vocal criticism, they failed to significantly sway election outcomes, leading many to question their actual impact. In today's media and political circles, they're often seen as disconnected from everyday voters, too conservative for liberals and too anti-Trump for most Republicans. This has pushed many of them to rethink their approach. Take, for example, the recent meeting at Mar-a-Lago, where major media personalities sat down with Trump, signaling a more pragmatic acknowledgement of his ongoing political relevance. Similarly, Alyssa Farah Griffin's more balanced tone on The View, where she challenges the liberal consensus, lines up with rumors that ABC wants a more Trump-friendly voice at the table. These shifts point to a broader trend. Conservatives and media figures who once distanced themselves from Trump are now adjusting their positions in order to stay relevant. It's a strong indication that Trump's influence still dominates the political and media narrative, forcing even his critics to reevaluate how they engage with today's shifting landscape.